if you thought the only way to use green tomatoes was to fry them, there's more than one way. I personally don't like fried green tomatoes, so I was very excited when I figured out that you could use them for salsa verde. Hi, I'm Rachel, and welcome back to Auxhart Gardening. On today's Harvest and Cook, we're going to talk about what to do with the little green tomatoes that are left on your tomato plants once they've kind of started to die off, which is about this time. Right now, I am getting ready to take out my tomato plants for the season because they are flopping over and they look incredibly sad and diseased, and it's about to get too cold for them anyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut them out and make room for some of the stuff that I'm planting in my fall garden. And instead of wasting these little baby green tomatoes, we are going to make some salsa verde with them. So if you're wondering how I have the heart to pull such good looking tomatoes off of my plant, a lot of them are actually looking like this. They're developing spots, they're not getting as big, and they're just not as good of tomatoes overall. And so even though it looks like I'm about to pull a lot of potential tomatoes off the plant, you have to remember that going from a green tomato this size to the full size ripe tomato is gonna take so much longer than you think. It's gonna take like at least 3 or 4 weeks. And in 3 or 4 weeks, these plants will be dead. It's gonna be way too cold. So by harvesting the tomatoes while they're still shiny, you can see even though this has spots on it, it's still shiny and still good to eat as a green tomato. Whereas if I left it on the plants any longer, if I was to leave them after the frost, and the frost of course would kill off all the tomatoes, but if I was to leave them through the frost, the tomatoes themselves would probably be inedible unless I pulled them right as the frost was happening, because they would basically get frost burned or the plant would die, and if you didn't notice, then the fruit would go all mushy because there's no live plant supporting it anymore. So when you're doing this, yes, you are potentially losing out on a little bit of fruit, but you're also kind of cutting your losses in that you know if you pull it now, you're still going to get something good to eat out of it. So as you can see, we've got a good amount of green tomato here that we can use to make salsa verde. And remember, this is food that might have gone to waste, might have succumbed to pest pressure, might have just mushed if we left it too long. So we're gonna take this food and go make something delicious out of it. So this recipe is actually adapted from the Ball Book of Canning. If you don't have it already, I highly recommend it. Even if you're not trying to can, there's some pretty awesome recipes in here. And that being said, this recipe can be canned. But instead of using tomatillos, like the recipe suggests, I'll be using the green tomatoes, obviously. I have made this recipe with half green tomatoes and half tomatillos, and that also worked out just fine. But I'm just gonna real quick read to you what the recipe says. I can put it in the description below too. And then I'm going to multiply that out for how much green tomato I have. So for every 4 pounds of tomatillos or green tomatoes, you need 2 medium white onions, 2 jalapeno or serrano peppers. I'm actually going to use way more than that because I don't think my jalapenos are spicy enough. I do like really spicy salsa, so just spice to your taste, obviously. 6 garlic cloves, ½ cup of lemon juice, 1/4 cup of chopped cilantro, 2 teaspoons of salt, and 1 teaspoon of black pepper. And as you'll hear me say a lot, adapt the recipe to your tastes. Don't feel like you have to be restricted by these exact amounts, especially when you're working with stuff from your garden. You know, it's not all cut and dry. It has to be exactly this much and exactly this much because we're not baking, we're cooking. And there's a lot more wiggle room when it comes to stuff like this. So I have 6.1 pounds. So well, that's 6 pounds, 1 ounce. So it's not quite 6.1 pounds, but it's approximately 6 pounds, which is about 1.5 times the recipe. So if one recipe would use 2 jalapenos, then if we're multiplying that out, I would use 3. And then because I want it more spicy than that, I'm going to use 2 extra. Now, as far as the other ingredients go, the only other thing that I have from my garden is the garlic. Unfortunately, I was not able to grow very many or very large onions this year. So the garlic will be from my garden, the onions are store-bought, the cilantro is store-bought, the lime juice is store-bought, and obviously salt and pepper are going to be store-bought. So this is a roasted salsa recipe, which means that for the tomatoes, peppers, onions, and garlic, we're going to roast those in the oven first before we mix all our ingredients together. So you can do this 2 ways. You can either turn the oven up to 425 like the recipe suggests, or you can broil the vegetables. And this is the way that my other salsa recipe works. And I've done it both ways and it comes out approximately the same, but broiling it will go faster. So that's what I'm going to do today. If you're not going to broil, otherwise turn your oven to 425 Fahrenheit and you're going to want to wait for that like crispy brownish black char to start to form on the vegetables before you pull them out. Something else I want to mention is I am not peeling or coring these tomatoes. I am just de-stemming them. And that is because A, I don't particularly care about the hard bit in the middle because I'm going to blend this at the end. If you wanted a chunkier salsa and if you're more sensitive to textures, you may want to core these out. But if you're like me and you're a little lazy, it is perfectly fine to just wash them and twist and pull the stem off. We're going to arrange these on the baking sheet, stem side down, and I'm going to have to do this in batches because I have so many. If you can fit it all at once, great. If not, don't worry. I'm going to blend everything in batches as well, and that's all going to get mixed together in a large bowl. Another note, because I'm not peeling and coring, I can still use these teeny tiny green tomatoes that have just barely started to form as well, so nothing has to go to waste. So I did actually manage to fit all of my tomatoes on one baking sheet. I'll need another one to do the onions and garlic and peppers, but I just wanted to take a shot of this, A, so you can see before and after, and B, just so that we can appreciate how many tomatoes we are actually going to still be able to use and eat that might otherwise go to waste. So for the onions, I just peeled them, sliced them in half, cut the tops off of my peppers, and peeled my garlic. Now, since the garlic is much smaller than the onions, if I leave them all together like this, I'll have to definitely watch and just make sure that I pull the garlic out first because it's gonna get crispy way before these really thick onions are. And I found yet another green tomato that I'd missed. Here's what the tomatoes look like after I've pulled them out. I'm just gonna let them rest here while I have the onions and peppers and garlic in the oven. And then I'm going to blend it with the other ingredients in batches, obviously, in this small 6-cup blender. So here is the final bowl of salsa verde. Now at this point, if you wanted to, you could taste test it, roast more peppers and add them if you need to. Of course, you'll want to salt to taste at this point as well. And if you are canning it, make sure that you've added enough lime juice to make it acidic enough to be able to water bath can, or if you're going to pressure can, it doesn't matter as much. But those are the things you need to start checking at this point. If you're wondering, what does she mean, test the pH? So in order to water bath can something, the pH needs to be 4.5 or lower. And so I got these on Amazon. It was pretty cheap. And basically you have a little strip like this. You can dip it into your salsa and then compare with the little gauge on the front, and that'll tell you if whatever you're about to can is acidic enough. Something I should note about this though is it's not going to line up exactly. If you take a look at this, you can see that green at the top, it doesn't really match anything, but you can see that the second one down from the top is that yellowish color, and those two at the bottom haven't changed, which means it's still in the acidic range. If you look at the back, you see once it gets more basic, that color will start to turn. But we're here in this-ish range, and I know that I'm planning on eating this salsa pretty soon, so I'm gonna say that this is probably okay, especially seeing as I added the right amount of lime juice from the recipe from the Ball Book of Canning, which is made for recipes that are meant to be canned. Also, I'm using tomatoes and not tomatillos, and tomatoes are going to be slightly more acidic on their own anyway. Alright, here is my final taste test. And I might add just a little bit more salt, but that is just about perfect. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you learned something about how to use all of those green tomatoes that you may have just been throwing away before now. Or if you thought the only way to use green tomatoes was to fry them, there's more than one way. I personally don't like fried green tomatoes, so I was very excited when I figured out that you could use them for salsa verde. As always, please do like and subscribe. Again, if you learned something from this, you telling YouTube that you learned something helps other people find it, and then other people can learn something, and we can just help a lot of people be happy. So please like and subscribe, and I will see you again very soon. Until next time, happy gardening.